Hello there. Today's lesson is via this video, and the topic is rather interesting. We are going to talk about perception. You see, if two friends go to a cinema to watch a movie, it's possible that one person might like it and the other person might not. Or if you ask both of them, what was your favorite scene? One person may have a certain point of view and the other one may have a different point of view. In organizational behavior, it is very important for us to understand that different people perceive things differently. Managers who understand how different members of their team perceive different things, they will be able to manage better. So, what's the definition of perception? Let's see. Perception. Each one of us perceives the world around us in different ways. It is our persona, perception of that reality which shapes and directs our behavior, and some reasonable or objective understanding of external reality. Everyone may see the same thing, but we may interpret it differently. I think this is a picture you might have seen before. If you look at it uh, long enough, you might see, some of us may see an old lady, some of us may see a young woman. Um, and in fact, if you look at it long enough, you may be able to see the young lady and the elderly lady at different points in time. So, this is what we talk about when we say perception. Human behavior is a function of the way in which each one of us perceives the world around us and how we perceive other people and indeed events that take place in our world. So, how do we scientifically describe perception? Well, perception is the process by which an individual gives meaning to the environment. Each one of us needs to give meaning to what we see. When we look at the way a certain process is carried out in an organization, it is our human need to give meaning to it. We may either like it, or we may hate it, or we may just accept it and just go along with it. So, perception is the process by which we take the input, process it in our mind, and then make a reaction. So, there are three steps to it: an input, our processing, and then our action or output. It is a cognitive and psychological process. Cognitive because we want to recognize our environment, psychological because we will take the information from our environment and process it. People's actions, emotions, thoughts, and feelings are often triggered by their perceptions. If you find that in your organization there are some people who are always very positive, that is because they have chosen to interpret the situations around them in a very positive light. Right now, as I'm making this recording, Malaysia is in a partial lockdown because of the COVID-19 virus. Now, you may take this as either something that is good because it will help you to be safe, number one. Number two, it will help you to get back to work in due course. It will help the economy continue progressing without a very severe impact on it. It may also be, in the case of some people, a chance for them to work from home and catch up on things because a lot of work and business is often done online these days. Yet others may say, oh, this is going to hold me back. I'm not going to be able to do a lot of work. I do not have the necessary tools. There may be others who don't have the tools, but yet they will say it is time to go back to a traditional way of working. So you see, people's action, emotions, thoughts, and feelings are pretty much triggered by their perception. Often, people who advisors on good personal development recommend to us, it is not what happens to you that defines you, it is how you react to what happens to you. That's what defines you. And your reaction should always be positive. So, since perception refers to the acquisition of specific knowledge about objects or events at any particular moment, it occurs whenever stimuli activate the sense organs. So either we hear something, we see something, we feel something, we experience something, we are watching something, we are at a place and we see something. So there's a stimuli, there is input to our senses. How do we perceive then? Like I said, there are three elements. Firstly, exposure. When a stimulus comes within the range of our sensory receptor nerves, it could be random. If you're walking along the street and suddenly you find that someone has dropped a phone, random. Or it could be deliberate. People go out into the jungle track for a jog and they want to feel the fresh air. That's deliberate. Um, so firstly, there must be exposure. We must be in a position where we will get the stimuli. Secondly, there may be attention. Now it is possible if I'm having a jog through the jungle, there may be things that I will see and there may be some that I miss. This is the thing about attention. You cannot have attention about everything. Now that you're listening to my video, there's a good chance that when you hear it for the first time, you might catch some things and then you might miss others. So this is why it's a good idea to always have paper and pen when you listen to a video like this so that you can make certain points and certain notes. This PowerPoint is also being uploaded to our Molven LMS and you can actually access it on your smartphones or laptops. I encourage you to listen to this video a few times because I am summarizing today's lesson in about 15 to 20 minutes. So firstly, how we perceive is there must be exposure to some stimulus, to some observation, what we see, what we hear, what we feel, what we smell, what we touch. Then there might be so many things that we can see, but we focus our attention on just a few because maybe those are the ones that attract us. If I am looking at a movie, when I come to an action scene, I pay more attention to that. So I remember the action scene better. So my involvement there will be high, as opposed to perhaps someone else who might be waiting for the romantic scenes or the comedy scenes, and they may remember the jokes in the movie better. Finally, the interpretation. The interpretation or assignment of meaning to sensations depends a lot on how we perceive the world. And when we perceive the world, one of the things important in OB is that we must try to perceive without bias, as I shall show you in the next few slides. But a little more about understanding how we process the inputs when we get exposure. In psychology, we process inputs either as bottom-up or top-down. Bottom-up means we get data inputs, we look at something, we listen to something, and then we pick up what we want and we leave what we want. For example, if we are listening to a music track, there may be some of us who want to pay attention to the lyrics, to the words of the song. There may be others who want to listen to the percussion, the drumming. There may be others who want to just pay attention to the music. So this is called bottom-up processing. We got the information and we just take what information we want on a selective basis, and selective attention tends to kick in. It's often part of our programming on what we choose and what we don't. Many psychologists say that our programming is made up of where we were, how we grew up, what experiences we had, what kind of family life we had, and things like that. But there's another processing that takes place. Sometimes, when we look at something, we want to make sense of it based on our existing knowledge that we already have. Now, when we want to make sense of what we have, we often will be able to understand something even though the information is incomplete. Our mind is always trying to connect the dots. Our mind is always trying to seek closure. It's always trying to make sense. For example, if you read the sentence at the bottom of your screen, were you able to read this sentence? I believe you were, because this sentence is obviously incorrect with many errors, but you will still be able to understand it because your mind has connected the dot. This is called top-down processing. In organizational behavior, it is the top-down processing that we want to be able to look at and manage. Most people will be looking at top-down processing. One of the psychologists and those people who did work in OB, Max Wertheimer, he introduced the proximity principle. He says that managers need to understand how people will connect the dots and try to use this in a beneficial manner. For example, please look at the first row of images there. What have you seen? I think most of us would say that we saw three pairs of dots, when in fact you could have said there are six dots. But we tend to cluster things together because we saw two together, two together, two together. So to make sense of it, we said, hey, we have three pairs of dots. The similarity principle states that we classify or group together stimuli that resemble each other in appearance in some respect. For example, maybe here again, you will see four pairs here rather than eight objects, even though there are two squares. Or maybe some of us may see, oh, there are two pairs of oval and two pairs of rectangle. It's possible, rather than seeing eight objects. At the end of the day, if you saw eight objects or stated that there are eight objects, you would not be wrong. Now, what happens in organizations is information is received by people. They process it. When they process it, it becomes perception. Based on the perception, there is an action link. For example, if observation and experience tell me that the people who get promoted in my organization are the guys who are not team players, therefore my perception will be that the organization only rewards individual performance and not teamwork. If that is the case, then the consequence of my action will be keeping the resources away from my colleagues in case I might need most of them. So this could become a negative perception. Positive perception could be where if I am seen to actually add some value to this organization, then I could actually help the organization to grow, and I'm sure that the right people will recognize this in due time. So information, perception, action link. Managers need to understand that. Let's talk about bias. Two main types of bias that we will address. First one is stereotyping. Stereotyping means we create certain pictures in the head. Lippmann is the guy who in 1922 said that we create simple mental images of groups and behavior. So if we meet an accountant, we have a certain perception of how accountants are. If we meet a nurse, we have certain perception of how they are, or a lecturer, or engineer, or poet, or actor. We tend to attribute certain personality traits. But actually, if you really got to know all the lecturers well, you would know that they are very different people. Each person has their own personality. If you met actors, you might find that different actors have different lifestyles and they behave differently. In the same way, accountants, nurses, other professionals would also behave differently. So the first thing managers must be careful about is stereotyping. The second one is attribution. Uh, Attribution is basically we have certain bias in our mind. Why is this person so rich? Or maybe because he knows a Dato or Pansiri, or maybe because he has some connection, or maybe because he committed a crime, he stole money, that is why he is so rich. This kind of negative attribution. Um, Maybe it is attributed to a story that we have read in the press that there's a lot of corruption, there's a lot of fraud. So when we see rich people, we tend to look at them with suspicion. That's a bias, and that's not healthy. That's not good. So attribution uh, and causality are two concepts which are very close. Causality is described usually in terms of either internal or external causality. For example, we might look at a colleague in our office and different people may attribute the cause, the reason for that person's rise to different things, depending on um, what kind of person that individual is. Maybe because that person is very good, very hardworking, or we may extend it to external causality. So causality is part of the attribution process. The main sources of errors, of course, in perception are we don't bother to get enough information about people, and we just take part information and we make a judgment. uh, and this is called prejudice. Prejudice is a word made up of prejudice, judging people before getting enough information about them, seeing what we expect to see and what we want to see. And so we just see what we want to see and not investigating further. Sometimes also allowing first impressions to stick on forever. And that's why there is a proverb that first impressions are very important. Why? Because it's a natural human tendency to have this bias. Also, if someone has a stereotype and someone comes and says, all teachers are like that, or all lecturers are like that, or all lawyers are like that, and we just accept it, that is bad. Sometimes we also have our own characteristics and we allow that to affect what we see in others and how we judge them. Attempting to decode non-verbal behavior outside the context of which it appears is important, because sometimes people may have behaved in a certain way because of the circumstances in which they were put. It is possible that the same person might actually behave differently. For example, you might say, oh, this person always comes late for meetings because he was late for a meeting when you first met him. So that is a bias in perception, basing attributions on flimsy and sometimes potentially irrelevant evidence. What can we do about it? Well, we should take more time and avoid instant or snap judgments about others. We should collect and consciously use more information about others. We should develop greater self-awareness and understanding of how our own bias, our preferences, and how they might actually affect perception and judgment of other people. We might need to check our own attributions. Do we link events and use those events as a basis for judging our managers, for judging our staff? Do we take certain events and link them together and assume that people had an unfair advantage because there were certain events externally that took place? We should be careful of that. I hope you will be able to go through this video more than once because there are a lot of valuable points here. There's a good chance that there will be a question on bias in your final exam. I would suggest that you read some essays or articles on that. So the most important learning here is that for us ourselves, we must keep an open mind because people may have different perspectives and different perceptions. The good manager is one who recognizes that and makes sure that she or he takes all of those different perceptions into account when communicating, when making policy, or when fixing action.